What stories of complete social torment do you have? My sister went to an 18th birthday party with 3 friends where over 120 people RSVP'd and only the host, his parents, and his girlfriend were there. She was telling me about it today and I couldn't think about anything except how horrible high school people can be. So here's the story. This guy set up a Facebook event for this party at this big hall and over 100 people RSVP'd. 700 plus invited. So it's not like no one knew about it. Considering the amount of people that would know about it and come, even if they hadn't clicked on attending, was that this guy booked a big hall that could cater for such a large event. This cost him around $1,500, which included food, security, etc. Then he decided instead of using an iPad, which would probably get lost and stolen on the night, he'd hire a DJ that cost $400. All of this, the host had spent months working, so he was able to actually afford it and hold the best party ever. Come the night of the party, weeks of preparation, money, and organization, this party is expected to go off. My sister heads off to this venue, fashionably late as well, and no one else is there. Much to their surprise, it's just an empty hall with lights going on and a DJ doing his thing. Then she finds the host and asks the normal questions, where is everyone, etc. He is as baffled as my sister was. Not even his best mates had shown up, which was even more surprising. Now, this is just the most gut-wrenching part of this whole thing. The host then calls his friends. He asks them, where are you guys? And obviously, on loudspeaker, an uproar of laughter comes from the person speaking, and you can also hear it in the background. He starts crying and everything, completely devastated about what has happened. Not only is he out of pocket for $1,900 at least, and knowing that all your friends possibly organized a boycott for this event, when I was told this story, I couldn't stomach how harsh and horrible people can be. I never even thought that this happened, especially on such a large scale as this. And maybe the worst part about this is that his quote-unquote friends had to all get together, sit around, waiting for him to call just so they could laugh at him? Grow up. Story 2. For my high school's 5-year anniversary, one enterprising student decided to take the lead and organize a reunion. He started by creating a Facebook group and went through our yearbook, tracking down and adding everyone he could possibly find. The group quickly grew as about 630 of the roughly 700 students from our graduating class joined in. People started catching up, sharing updates about where life had taken them, where they were living, what they were doing. As the conversation in the group gained momentum, the organizer took it a step further and set up an actual in-person get-together. For the event invite, about 100 people RSVP'd with a yes, while another 300 or so marked themselves as maybe. With this promising turnout in mind, the guy went all out to plan what was supposed to be an unforgettable night. He rented a private room at a bowling alley, hired a bartender, and ordered plenty of food. He even brought along all 4 of our yearbooks and painstakingly put together a DVD compilation of random videos from our high school years. Sporting events, school plays, funny skits from the school news, you name it. The effort he put in was nothing short of extraordinary. But then came the day of the reunion. 5 people showed up. Just 5, the organizer, his girlfriend, who wasn't even part of our class, me, a friend of mine, and a random person I recognized but never really spoke to, and another guy who happened to work at the bowling alley. To say it was disappointing would be an understatement. It was quite possibly the saddest, most awkward thing I've ever witnessed. The look of defeat on the organizer's face was so devastated. I could feel his disappointment as if it were my own. It was like watching someone's soul deflate in real time. We tried to make the best of it, getting tipsy and bowling a few games, but the mood was grim. The excitement and energy that should have filled the room were replaced by a heavy, black cloud of shame that eventually left everyone silent. After a while, the silence became unbearable, so my friend and I decided to leave. To Alan, if you're reading this, I'm sorry, man. You deserved better. So when an RSVP involves nothing more than a mouse click, you can be pretty sure most people will say, sure, I'll come. Story 3. Back in high school, I used to work in the showroom at Chuck E. Cheese's. My main job was to host birthday parties, and I took that responsibility with no joke. I made it my goal to ensure that every kid who came through those doors had the most unforgettable birthday party of their life. I wasn't just doing a job, I was creating memories, and believe me, I threw those parties with everything I had. One year, I was scheduled to work on the 4th of July. It was a holiday, so I wasn't expecting a packed house, and sure enough, we only had one birthday party booked that day. I got assigned to work it, and even though the RSVP list was small, just about 5 people, it turned out to be much smaller than that. When the time came, it was just a father and his son sitting at the birthday table, alone. As I got to talking with the dad, I found out that things hadn't been easy for them. The mom and her side of the family were in the state penitentiary in Oklahoma or something like that. So the dad had gotten custody of his son and moved to Tennessee to start over. He had invited a few friends to the party, but none of them showed up. It broke my heart to see this little boy, who should have been celebrating with friends and family, just sitting there with his dad in an empty showroom. They weren't well off, and they had only bought the bare bones party package, but I couldn't just let it be like that. I knew we had to do something to make this kid's birthday special. So I started asking around to all my coworkers, and we pooled our money together, about $40 of my own and contributions from everyone else. We were determined to give this boy the best birthday. It was about an hour before closing time, and the place was pretty much empty, so we decided to throw a party like no other. All of the employees joined in, and we made 10 pizzas, letting the birthday boy pick out whatever toppings he wanted. We handed him around 500 tokens and spent the next 2 hours playing games and partying with him like there was no tomorrow. But we didn't stop there. After closing, we put on the animatronic show just for him. And if that wasn't enough, my boss went the extra mile. He brought out an Xbox, and the kid got to play on the TVs in the showroom. The smile on that boy's face, priceless. It was close to midnight when they finally left, but the night wasn't over yet. My boss had brought fireworks and drinks for the employees to enjoy after work, planning to let off some steam in the parking lot. But we couldn't let the kid miss out on the fun, so we invited him and his dad to join us. We spent the next few hours while striking off bottle rockets and Roman candles, and the dad even got a drink out of it. It was one of those spontaneous, magical nights where everything just came together perfectly. As the night wound down, the dad pulled a few of us aside and started crying. He was so overwhelmed by what we had done for his son, so grateful that we had turned what could have been a lonely, disappointing birthday into an unforgettable one. It was one of those moments that reminded me why, despite all the frustrations and challenges of working at Chuck E. Cheese's, there were times when it felt like the best job in the world. I ended up working at Chuck E. Cheese's for 2 years, and while I disliked it a lot, that night was one of the best of my entire life. It wasn't just about throwing a party. It was about creating joy, about giving a kid and his dad a memory they could hold on to during tough times. The total amount we put together for that night was close to $200. My boss matched my donation, and everyone else pitched in a few bucks here and there. I haven't seen the kid or his dad since, but I do know that the dad wrote an email to customer service, and we ended up getting some fancy pins on our lanyards as a thank you. Chuck E. Cheese's had this hospitality hero competition where managers would give you a slice of pizza on a chart if they found out that you're doing something nice for customers. 4 slices made a full pizza, and getting around 15 pizzas would earn you the hospitality hero level, which came with a cool pin featuring Chuck E. Cheese himself. I think all of us working that night got one. And if I were reading this, I'd want proof too, but I don't have it, that lanyard or pin anymore. I left them with the manager when I quit. However, I do still have my 1-year pin. It fell off my lanyard back in the day, and I just found it in my car about a month ago. That's when the party turned into a pizza-fueled rescue mission, a super-duper fun one at that. Story 4. In Spanish culture, it's tradition to have a quinceañera. I didn't want to have one, but my mom insisted on having it either way. The thing is, our house isn't very big, certainly not big enough to host a large gathering. But that didn't stop her. She went ahead and invited family and close friends from all over. I'm not talking about people from out of state. She invited people from out of the country too. Meanwhile, I was limited to inviting only 5 of my friends, just 5. But my mom, she got to invite as many people as she wanted, so we were expecting around 40 plus people to show up. I wasn't exactly thrilled, but I figured if this was happening, maybe it would at least be somewhat fun. The day of my quinceañera arrived, and it was, well, less than ideal. Out of the 40 plus people we expected, maybe 6 actually showed up, just 6. 2 of my friends made it, along with 4 family members who lived in the city. And that was it. The rest, they didn't bother to come. It was embarrassing and disappointing all at once. And the presents, well, let's just say they didn't exactly make up for the lack of guests. I got 1 card with $5 in it and some cheap perfume. Now, don't get me wrong, the gift came from a very sweet older lady who didn't have much to give, so I appreciated the sentiment. To top it all off, I was stuck in this super poofy dress for hours, and the heels I was wearing, they hurt. Meanwhile, everyone else in more or less semi-casual attire, making me feel even more out of place. And as if that weren't enough, it was raining on my actual birthday. The whole thing was a disaster from start to finish. But what really stung was what happened the following year. My sister turned 15, and naturally she had her own quinceañera. She invited the same people, but this time they decided to rent a space for the party, which was something I had suggested to my mom the previous year. But back then, she had brushed off the idea, saying it wouldn't work out. Well, it worked out just fine for my sister. My mom went all out, spending nearly 6 times the amount of money she had spent on my own. They got a DJ, a lavish cake, and the whole thing was incredibly well organized. Almost everyone who was invited showed up, about 105 people in total. The same people who had skipped my party were there for my sister, dressed to the nines and ready to celebrate. The contrast between mine's and my sister's couldn't have been more stark. While I was stuck in a poofy dress with heels that hurt, surrounded by a handful of people, my sister had a beautifully organized party with a full guest list, good music, and a much better atmosphere. Her presents? They were worlds apart from what I had received. She got good makeup, quality perfume, around $600+ in cash, and even some new shoes and clothes. It was the kind of celebration you'd expect for a quinceañera, and it was everything mine wasn't. I couldn't help but feel like there was definitely a favorite in the family, and unfortunately, it wasn't me. Story 5. I have a heartwarmer for you to make up for it, although it does start with a snub. I have a friend, let's call him Jed. He went to a high school leavers party. This guy was given a bad roll of the dice when it came to certain genes. He was unusually short, getting plump, had glasses, wasn't great in the looks department, and had a bit of a geeky aspect going on. But in all, he was a very likable guy if you weren't shallow, and I've had many good times with him, even though side by side we look like the main characters in the film twins. Jed, if you're reading this, by the way, hi, you can probably tell who I am. Anyway, Jed was invited to this leavers party hosted by this gorgeous star pupil, basically the real-life equivalent of a movie prom queen, only stereotypically shallow and mean. We all call her Kez. Not socially popular at that point, Jed was getting on fine with the other guests, even though he wasn't close friends with many of them. And one guy he was getting on particularly well with was the brother of the hostess. Anyway, long story short, at one point as Jed was going to get a drink or more snacks or something, Kez turned around, spotted him, and in a move straight out of a cheerleader movie, made a face and said, "Oh, who invited him?" Loud enough for Jed and others to hear. The feeling of embarrassment must have been sickening for him. I wasn't there, or I'd have told her where to shove those words and left with him, but he had no one backing him up. It wrote off his night, so he went back to the crowd he'd been hanging with and started to diplomatically say his farewells to the people he'd been talking to, reckoning the night wasn't going to get any better. Some of the people he was with saying goodbye to were surprised he was leaving so early and so suddenly, as they'd been having a good night together. They didn't know what had just happened, and one of the people who was curious was the brother of Kez. He saw that Jed looked a little upset and asked what was wrong, so Jed told him. The guy listened, looking over at his sister, who seemed to be looking back at him uncomfortably. The guy asked if Jed could stay a while he sorted something out, but Jed said he needed to leave. The guy apologized, shook his hand, and apologized profoundly on the part of his sister, and that Jed would be missed. Jed went into the hall and got his coat. He put on his shoes and opened the front door. He turned back to give a final wave to the people at the party, and was treated to the side of Kez, the hostile hostess, and her brother standing in a corner. Kez's brother was clearly angry, staring, berating Kez, the other hand holding her shoulder so she couldn't leave. Kez was bright red with embarrassment and openly crying while her friends took their turn being frozen for the second time that night. Story 6. In 7th grade, I formed a friendship with a guy named Derp who was quite unique. He had long flowing hair that many people remarked on, and his mannerisms were more feminine than most of boys his age. But what stood out to me more than his appearance was his background. He was incredibly poor. In fact, Derp hadn't celebrated his birthday since he was 4 years old because his family simply couldn't afford it. I remember him telling me in 6th grade that his parents had completely forgotten his birthday in the past. When they finally remembered, they didn't even bother to walk upstairs to wish him a happy birthday. Instead, they sent him a text message. Then came the summer before 7th grade. Derp's parents finally saved up enough money to throw a party for him and his 2 brothers. This was a moment for him, and he invited everyone he knew, excitedly hoping that this time he would get the celebration he had missed for so long. About 30 people confirmed they would attend, and I could sense his excitement building as the date approached. On the day of the party, I arrived at his house and immediately noticed something strange. A significant number of the guests were older, high school students. Confused, I asked Derp about it, and he explained that those were his brother's friends. I quickly realized that I was the first guest to arrive, which made me feel a little uneasy. Derp's mom greeted me enthusiastically, saying, "Oh, are you Derpette? Derp talks about you all the time." I was taken aback because I rarely hung out with him outside of school, but I shrugged it off as just an embarrassing moment typical of moms. After about half an hour waiting, a boy from our class who had a disability showed up. Derp's face lit up with excitement. He was so happy to see another familiar face. Unfortunately, that was the only guest to show up out of the 30 people who had RSVP'd, and the countless others who had said maybe. It was heartbreaking to watch Derp's visible disappointment as the reality of the situation sank in. He wore that familiar look of resignation, like he was thinking, well, what was I expecting? To make matters worse, the cake that had been prepared for him and his brothers was blown out by his brothers because his parents forgot to call Derp over to the table. He ended up with just a small piece of cake, but then the handicapped boy took a bite right after. I could see the sadness creeping into Derp's expression, and I felt helpless. The worst part was that this likely would be the last birthday party Derp would have for a long time, given his family's financial situation. As I sat there with him, I felt a deep sadness for my friend. He deserved so much better than this. That day stayed with me long after the party ended. I couldn't shake the feeling of how unfair it was that someone like Derp, who had so much to offer in terms of friendship and kindness, was left feeling so lonely on what should have been a day of celebration. Story 7. I can't remember the exact year, early 2000s I think, but my family and my best mate spent a solid week organizing what we hope would be an epic New Year's Eve party at our place. We really went all out for it. The yard was a mess, so we spent 2 full days just cleaning it up, making sure it was ready to host a crowd. After that, we sorted out materials for fire pits, which we thought would be a nice touch for the evening, and put up big tarps to serve as windbreaks. To make sure everyone stayed warm, we even hired some heaters for these outdoor areas. As the week went on, a couple of my other friends got into the spirit of things and thought it would be a fun idea to make up some random flyers advertising the party and put them up around town. At first, we thought it was a laugh, but then reality struck and we started freaking out a bit. To prepare, we got our hands on extra chairs and long tables, making sure there'd be plenty of space for everyone. My mom, always supportive, even forked out a bit of money for a bunch of junk food and spent time cooking up some nibbles here and there to make sure no one went hungry. Finally, New Year's Eve rolled around and we were in full-on setup mode. We were running around like mad, setting up all the tables, arranging chairs, and making sure everything was secured and ready for what we expected to be a huge crowd. As the night came, a few of my best mates showed up and a couple of people turned up to see my mom. We kept expecting the flood of partygoers to arrive any minute, but as the hours passed, it was just us, 5 of us, sitting around, staring at each other. The fire pits were crackling, bowls of food were set out all over the place, and music was playing, but the crowd we'd prepared for, nowhere to be found. At first, it felt a bit unreal. After all that planning and preparing, we were left with a party of 5. But the thing is, none of us were really bothered by it. In fact, we ended up having an amazing time. I want to hear the story about that amazing time, not about the failure, but maybe that'll be for another video. And if you are enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. On to the next story. Story 8. For my 23rd birthday last month, I was feeling a bit apprehensive about throwing a party. The idea of creating a Facebook event made me uneasy because I was afraid of the possibility of it turning into a flop, something I had experienced in the past. I'd heard countless stories of people inviting all their friends, only to have a handful show up, leaving the host feeling disappointed and embarrassed. Despite these fears, about 2 weeks before my birthday, I thought it could be fun. So I took the plunge and created the event, inviting a small group of around 13 or 14 people. As the days passed, life took an unexpected turn. My mother became ill, and just a week before my birthday, my father and I found ourselves rushing her to the hospital. It was a chaotic and stressful time, compounded by the fact that the doctors and nurses weren't forthcoming with information. They needed to run several tests before they could give us a diagnosis, which left us feeling helpless and anxious. The uncertainty of my mother's condition weighed heavily on all of us, and she ended up spending 2 full weeks in the hospital. Things became even more complicated because my grandmother lives with us. She has advanced dementia and requires extensive care. She cannot feed, bathe, dress, or use the toilet without assistance. Normally, a home care worker would help in the mornings and my mother would take over in the evenings. With my mother in the hospital, my father and I stepped in to manage her care, which added another layer of responsibility to our already overwhelming situation. While juggling these challenges, I was also attending school full-time and going on job interviews in search of summer employment. To be honest, I was so preoccupied with everything that was happening that I likely wouldn't have remembered my birthday at all if my mother hadn't called me from the hospital at 6:30 a.m. to sing happy birthday. It was both a touching and bittersweet moment. Oh, it's my birthday. Tonight might end up being awesome, I thought, feeling a flicker of excitement amidst all the stress. I checked the Facebook event page only to see that 3 people had RSVP'd. I tried to stay optimistic. After all, 3 people were better than none. I called my best friend, one of those three, curious about what time he planned to show up. He told me he couldn't make it because he was working. I felt pretty crummy already, but this was the last thing I needed. It felt like a culmination of everything that had been weighing on me. After that conversation, I slumped on my couch, feeling a wave of discouragement wash over me. I began to question the wisdom of throwing a party during such a confusing time. I won't go too deeply into my feelings as they were complicated, but I can tell you I was feeling pretty mopey and panicky. The looming reality of facing my social life, or lack thereof, was overwhelming. Finally, 45 minutes after the party was supposed to start, I received a text from one of my friends saying, "Where are you?" Fear rushed through me and I quickly jumped in my car and drove over to the bar. When I arrived, I found Derp and his girlfriend had already settled in and ordered wings. Derp looked a bit annoyed, but I quickly brought them around to smooth things over. We ended up having a great conversation about Diablo 3 and started planning another LAN party. At that moment, it felt like Derp understood that I needed a friend to show up, even if it was just the two of them. As the minutes ticked by, I started to relax and let go of my earlier anxieties. I found myself genuinely enjoying the company of Derp and his girlfriend. About 30 minutes later, to my surprise, 5 more friends showed up at once. We quickly pulled over a second table and the energy in the room began to lift. It felt as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and the laughter and conversations began to flow more freely. Minutes later, 3 or more people trickled in and we had to grab another table to accommodate the growing crowd. This pattern continued and soon everyone I had invited, except for my best friend, had arrived. I couldn't believe it. When the party was in full swing, there were around 30 of us and we had taken over nearly half of the bar. Our table setup was chaotic. That night was easily one of the best nights of my life. I felt a sense of gratitude for the amazing people I had around me, people who chose to show up and celebrate with me even when I doubted whether anyone would come. In the midst of the chaos of life, this party became a beautiful reminder of friendship and support, and I couldn't have asked for a better way to celebrate my birthday. Story 9. Oh, I have a story to share which is off to this topic but really shaped my experience during my school years. So in England, we have this thing called sixth form. For those who might not be familiar, it's essentially a 2-year program that follows high school where students can stay at their secondary school to work towards specific qualifications, typically A levels. Now, I had my journey through sixth form and it was a bit of a roller coaster. In fact, I found myself in sixth form not once, but twice. The first time around, I struggled and failed my first year. I decided to give it another chance, only to face the same fate again. My primary focus was music production, a passion of mine that I just hoped would flourish during this time. However, the reality was quite disappointing. The facilities we had access to were laughable at best. They couldn't even compare to the smallest and most affordable home studios. The funding for our music program was practically non-existent, which meant that we were left with outdated equipment that barely functioned. To make matters worse, our teacher had little to no experience in teaching music production. He was a nice guy and tried his best, but it was evident that he was out of his depth. The studio gear was so old and unreliable that it became a constant source of frustration, not to mention the cheap drums we had to work with for our recordings. Despite these challenges, I found some solace in my friendships within the class. I stuck around, opting to do the bare minimum because I quickly realized that putting in effort was mostly futile. I learned far more on my own, experimenting at home with my small setup and exploring the vast resources available on the internet. Whenever we did get a recording assignment, it felt like a breath of fresh air. I loved spending studio time with my friends, and those moments were genuinely enjoyable. In fact, I often skipped mandatory classes to help my friends with their projects. Recording can be a complex process, especially when you're alone. There's a lot of running back and forth to get everything right. Amid all of this, there was a girl in my sixth form who really caught my eye. The fact weighed heavily on me. I found myself spiraling into dismay because I had this nagging feeling that she might actually like me too. She would drop hints and give me signals which only deepened my confusion. Yet I never made a move because she was already in a long-term relationship. When I wasn't busy in the studio, I spent most of my time lounging around in the student area, trying to keep a low profile and avoid the younger kids who were still figuring things out. Sixth form didn't follow a strict schedule, so we had a lot of free periods. While my classmates used this time for studying, I often found myself just hanging out, especially with that girl I had developed feelings for. As time went on, I started to like her more and more. Her playful signals gave me a sense of comfort, but I was still held back by my insecurities and the reality of her situation. During that period, I was chubby. I wanted to lose weight, but it didn't consume my thoughts. I was fairly content with my life overall. However, one day while lounging around with her and a couple of friends, I brought up a conversation we had previously shared. I mentioned a time when she jokingly said she dreamed of leaving her boyfriend for me. I was trying to be lighthearted and playful, hoping it might lead to something deeper. But her response cut me to the core. She said, "I would never leave him for you. Look at you. You're unattractive." That was the moment when my emotional challenge began. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath me, and everything I thought I knew about our connection shattered. I felt utterly humiliated and rejected. It's funny how life works. People come and go, and I often wish I still knew that guy she was with just to understand the impact he had on my feelings. So I started to feel the weight of emotional challenge settle in, and it only got worse as time went on. As my health declined, I began to gain weight. I'm not entirely sure how much I ballooned up during school, but I remember going a peak of 286 pounds sometime after I left. A few people around me started jokingly calling me a lazy bones. At first, it was all in good fun, nothing serious, but eventually the jokes took a harsh turn. I was already skipping most of my classes, but as my emotional challenge took a toll, I found it difficult to even show up at school. I began coming in only 2 or 3 times a week. This naturally raised red flags, and I got called into the principal's office for a discussion about my declining performance and attendance. I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but when I was in that state, the last thing I wanted to do was accept that I was struggling. When asked why I was failing, my best response was often a vague, "I don't know." The principal, perhaps well-intentioned but clueless, told me I was getting lazy and needed to get my act together or else I could face expulsion. Hearing this felt like a strike. The pressure to perform weighed heavily on me, but I was sinking further into a pit of despair. There was this one guy in my year who had been a good friend of mine. He was smart, acing all his classes, and had always been someone I looked up to. But things changed when he came out as sassy. Suddenly, he became the beloved, sassy best friend for all the girls, despite the fact that many of them had treated him poorly before. It was baffling to witness that kind of behavior, how quickly they turned on a dime. With his newfound popularity came a change in attitude towards me. He started calling me lazy at every opportunity, and it was no longer a playful jab. It was something filled with an air of superiority, as if he relished the chance to put me down. Now, the term lazy might not seem hurtful on its own, but when you're already struggling with disinterest in schoolwork that feels pointless, hearing that word hurts deep. It wasn't long before other people picked up on this trend, and I began to notice more classmates openly labeling me as lazy and a failure. This wasn't a concerned conversation, it was more just like a judgment, as if I had no right to be in the same space as them. My friends were kind enough to avoid piling on, but it felt like they were silent witnesses to this trend that had emerged. "Let's make 'em bongo feel worthless" became an unspoken game. Fast forward to about 3/4 of the way through the school year, and the school decided to introduce a yearbook for the first time in sixth form history. Initially, I didn't think much of it, but then I noticed they handed out a survey to fill out. As I scanned through the questions, things like most likely to succeed and best haircut, I realized I wasn't really engaged. I didn't know most of the people well enough to answer, so I hesitated to participate. Then I flipped to the second page and saw a question that made my heart sink. Laziest student. In that instant, I knew everyone would be writing my name down. It felt like a bad joke, especially since the guy who had been so harsh towards me was part of the committee that was organizing the yearbook. My friends noticed the question too, and while they acknowledged it awkwardly, they were kind enough not to put my name down. When the principal entered the room, he enthusiastically encouraged everyone to complete their surveys, making it a point to say, "I hope everyone's filled out their surveys. There are a lot of surefire contenders out there." He glanced directly at me and a few others, cueing laughter from the crowd. It felt like the walls were closing in on me as the week progressed, and I was bombarded with comments like, "Have you prepared an acceptance speech, or are you too lazy for that too?" The day of the assembly arrived, and I made the decision to skip it entirely. The thought of standing up in front of everyone to accept some trophy for being the laziest student was unbearable. I found out later from a classmate that I did, indeed, win. The mockery continued even in my absence. They laughed about how I wasn't there to accept the award, turning it into a running joke. And the winner is Umbongo. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, but I'm sure that comes as no surprise to anyone. I'm not exaggerating. Allegedly, the principal even joined in on the ridicule. On the Facebook wall post where I was informed about my victory, my former friend chimed in with a comment, Ombongo is defeated. Reading that felt like a dagger to the heart. If only they had taken just 5 minutes to talk to me, to show genuine concern, maybe they would have realized how hard I was struggling. That moment was a turning point for me. I deleted Facebook, seeking to remove myself from the toxicity that had seeped into my life, and I decided to use the gym. It was time for a change, not just physically, but mentally as well. Story 10. This story might get lost among the others, but I feel compelled to share it anyway. Back in 6th grade, there was this kid in my year who no one really liked. He was the type of guy who constantly made bad comments, showing no discretion or consideration for anyone's feelings. His brashness alienated him from our classmates, and over time, it became clear that he was an outsider in our group. One day, this kid invited a bunch of us to his birthday party. I casually chatted with my group of friends to see who was going, and to my surprise, every single one of them reacted with a resounding, absolutely not. Intrigued, I started asking around, reaching out to different circles of friends. What I discovered was disheartening. Not a single person was planning to attend. I couldn't shake the image of this kid sitting alone in his living room waiting for friends who would never arrive. Even though he had a reputation for being a bad guy, I couldn't help but feel empathy for him. So I made the decision to go to his party knowing full well that I would be the only one there. When the night arrived, I showed up a little early, hoping to hang out with him before the reality of the situation struck. We started playing some classic PlayStation 1 games, laughing and talking about random, silly things. It was nice to see him relax a little and enjoy himself. However, about an hour after the party was supposed to start, he suddenly realized that no one else was coming. His expression changed from excitement to confusion and then to despair. He lost it and started crying uncontrollably, running to his room. For the rest of the evening, I found myself sitting alone, eating pizza and playing games while talking to his mother, who had come into the room after her son had fled. She was clearly upset and shared with me that her son's father had passed away when he was young. I listened as she explained how she worked long hours as a single parent, trying to keep their lives stable. She confided that her son struggled to connect with others, often acting out because he didn't know how to cope with his father's loss. It became painfully clear to me that this kid was alone, grappling with emotions far beyond his years. I got up and hugged his mother tightly, trying to contain my own tears as I empathized with her heartbreak and sense of hopelessness. She thanked me for being there for him when no one else would, and it was a moment I would never forget. The next day at school, I faced a barrage of teasing from my classmates about attending the party. They didn't understand why I went, but I stood my ground, telling them that we had a great time together. I explained to a few of my close friends about the situation at home and how this kid was really struggling. Slowly but surely, we began to include him in our group, inviting him to hang out and even go bowling together. As the year progressed, I watched him come out of his shell a little more each time we spent together. But eventually, life took a turn, and at the end of the year, this kid and his mom moved away. I lost contact with him and have never seen him since. I'm currently studying for a degree in social science, majoring in counseling. I want to ensure that no one else feels as isolated and unsupported as that boy did on his birthday. Story 11. All through high school, I was never invited to a party, not one. I wasn't unattractive nor mean, but I was definitely awkward. I had braces and was really into Diablo 2 and Halo at the time. Fast forward to college, I started coming out of my shell and picked up a lifeguarding job. 3 years later, I became the head guard of my pool and my social awkwardness began to fade, especially since I was working with mostly women and kids every day. One weekend, my parents were leaving for the weekend, leaving me alone in our big farmhouse. I thought, what? Really? And decided to invite my entire staff to a party, even the awkward ones, because I knew how that felt. The night of the party arrived. A few buddies from work showed up early, bringing drinks. I had drink pong set up on 2 different floors, chips everywhere, and frozen pizzas ready to cook. Everything was in place, but I was nervous. What if no one showed up? Then, cars started pouring in. The gravel road outside looked like a rush hour traffic in LA with people flowing out of their cars. My backyard quickly turned into a parking lot, and within an hour, I had to move the horses into their shed to make room for more cars. 3 hours later, there were about 150 people at my house, which basically comprised a citywide pool staff. Story 12. When I was in high school, we were really poor, so I never had birthday parties, and on several occasions, my family actually forgot it was my birthday. So for my birthday, I convinced my parents to let me have a party in our family room. I decorated, bought an outfit, made a bunch of food, meticulously planned the music, and invited over 100 people. My budget was very small and I wasn't super popular, but I wasn't a pariah. It was a big deal for me, so I expected at least my closest friends to show up, but no one showed up. I sat there for hours in my party dress waiting. Eventually, I started to cry, and my parents got mad because my crying was interrupting their TV show, so they sent me to my room. I think that was the year I realized my birthday was vile. Story 13. My mother wanted to throw a 19th birthday party. I didn't want one. I like birthdays, but my mother sometimes thinks her children's birthdays are in her honor for ever giving birth to us, so we better be celebrating. She invited some of my quote-unquote friends over without telling me, including this guy I didn't like. I had to put up with him all night. The only highlight was that my sister made me a totally awesome cake which featured Goku with a vampire. Unfortunately, my best friend got really tipsy and spilled drinks all over it. It was a well-intentioned social birthday torment. Looking for a cake photo, but I doubt it. It may have been taken on film, not digital. Also, I still ate it despite it being a little soaked. From cake to milkshake real quick, either way, sounds like a win-win to me. Story 14. In 2010, there was this kid named Steven that tried too hard to be likable. Honestly, it's high school. So long as you're social, you'll have friends. Well, Steven was this nerdy, awkward kid who tried too hard to be everybody's friend to the point where no one liked him. He would always join people's conversations and always crack the dumbest, lamest jokes. Anyways, the school year was ending and popular girl of the year named Maya announced that she was having a graduation party at her house. Everyone was invited. It was to be on June 12th. 2 days later, my best friend Mike came up to me and told me that Steven had personally asked him to help him set up a graduation party. Being the nice guy that he is, he agreed. Steven then decided to hand out invitations with the words Mike and Steven's party on it. It said June 12th on it, the same night as Maya's party. Needless to say, 5 people showed up, then left for Maya's house. Story 15. For my birthday, my mom and I planned out this whole theme and had a party planning place to decorate a warehouse with white curtains to white everything out, a disco ball, a DJ with lights, and a lounge area that had tables with glowing centerpieces and all. I'd been having some family troubles, so it was an amazing thing for my mom to do for me and a lot of money. I passed out the invites at school to all my friends and didn't invite the jock that had made a point of trying to make my life a roller coaster. I had over 100 people coming. The day of the party, I got a flood of texts telling me that people couldn't make it. The jock had planned a party of his own and invited everyone that was coming to my party. I ended up with about 30 people there, 20 of which didn't go to my school. Almost everyone I went to school with didn't show up. My mom even called that kid and told him he could come if he wanted to, but to please not do this to me on my birthday. I will never, ever get over the embarrassment from everyone at school the following Monday. I transferred schools after that. I'll never, ever forget that feeling. Story 16. I never celebrate my birthday. Never. On the surface, I tell people it's because I don't care. In all reality, though, it's because I fear rejection, the type I feel is shown in this thread. I'm a popular enough guy, but it's so fragile, I don't want possibilities of folks not showing up. I know it's borderline relevant, but it still feels nice to say it. Thanks to Reddit. It's nice that I can say what I feel and it's not judged harshly. Hopefully. Anyway. Story 17. Something similar. My friend invited her 7 friends, including me, to a birthday lunch at Applebee's. It was her 20th birthday. I was the first to arrive at Applebee's. We waited and waited and waited. No one had shown up, so we grabbed a table. We continued to wait. Finally, my friend called her friends to check where they were. They canceled or didn't answer and completely flaked. I was the only person who attended. I felt bad, so I gave her $10 as a birthday gift. Very, very inconsiderate friends. Story 18. When I was in high school, me and some friends had invited this guy who wasn't really popular but not really a loser to hang out in the town park with a lunch all set up. Then everyone was saying, let's ditch him before he gets here. So everyone got up, went into town, and this guy came walking into the park looking around all alone. Me and my girlfriend at the time stayed back and hung out and told him everyone ditched us. We ended up going to a party that the others weren't invited to. The next morning in class, they were wondering where we were, and we told them at a party. We asked, where were you guys? And they said, at home, doing homework. Ha! Story 19. For my birthday, I had invited all my friends to go for supper. We booked the party room for it as well and told the people we needed a table for 20 people. Only like 5 of them showed up. The rest of them told me afterwards that they weren't allowed to go. Then I saw most of them at a party from the same night. Another was, one of the guys said he had to go to his grandma and then was texting my friend who was at my party the whole night. Basically, we had to use a big room for the 6 of us. I'm pretty sure the waitress laughed at me. Story 20. Looking back on when I was in high school, I would have laughed at the idea of going to a large dance hall with parents standing around and a DJ spinning tracks. And I don't think I was that far from being an ordinary teenager, so that indicates to me that your sister's friend doesn't recognize social cues very well. The boys are wicked and they prey on the kid who can't distinguish between laughing with friends and being laughed at by someone who most definitely doesn't consider you their friend. But really, if you're a high schooler boy and you don't understand that your parents' presence impedes on your friends' ongoing mission, then I really think you're a bit out of touch. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and actually, thanks for hanging out with me on this one.